I'd like to back up a little bit about how the Navy promotes people. Everybody in the Navy that's qualified with the time and they have passed their proficiency in their rate and they have passed the practical factors showing that they could do the job, they then can take the examination for advancement. The examination is normally given every July, and the promotion takes place sometime over the next year, depending on what your grade was and what month that somebody got out of the Navy of your rating so that they had an opening so they could move you up. Since I passed the test sky high each time, I always got promoted with the first group right away. I took the exam for chief. I had prepped myself for it. By not just doing the practical factors and the correspondence courses for that one thing that was mandatory, but I took every correspondence course anywhere related with that function. So I would take a correspondence course on hand tools. I would take a correspondence course on ship navigation, anything that I could get a correspondence course on it, and I would get it graded and I would throw it into my resume. And it always helped me because in the E8 and E9 exams, if you hadn't taken the Petty Officer's Guide by the book, the Navy didn't, it was written by 2 Navy captains, and it was put out to the fleet recommended reading. Well, it was a nice thick book, about 2 inches thick, and I went through that thing, and every time I took a test of any kind, I had a red and a blue pencil. I would come back and I would write as much of the test as I could remember, and I would go through all of my correspondence, and I would take a red or a blue line. If there was a question that was similar, I would put a blue line on there. If it was a actual test question, I would put a red line on it. So before I ever took another test, I would always pull all my red lines out, read them over, and I was always prepared for the next exam. As crazy as it seemed, they wanted you to be able to read local newspapers. They wanted to know what your community activities were, things like that. And I recall when I was taking the chief's exam, I started to laugh because one of the test questions I ran across had come out of the Navy Guide was, what is inscribed on the back of the Navy chief's tie clip? Now, if you hadn't read Petty Officer's Guide, you would have never known that. And you weren't chiefs at that time, so you couldn't look at a tie clip. I started to laugh because I said it's 10074. I recall I had underlined that in that book. So my advice to every sailor was, and I told this to my son's group when I entertained his graduation group and stuff, had them come to the house, and I would listen to them when they talked. And they would sit there and they'd say, oh, I really don't like the Navy and this and that, and I'm just doing my time. And then I would hear some say, well, you know, I really wanted the schooling and everything. And my advice to them was, whether you're going to re-enlist or not, the best thing you can possibly do when you report to your command is saying that you are a career sailor. Who is the chief going to send to the best schools? Who is the chief going to give the best jobs to? It's not the guy that says, I don't like this Navy and I'm getting out as soon as I can, or I love the Navy, even if it's not true. I love the Navy and you won't get the crappy details. So my son took that into heart and he went into the Navy and he did well, but he actually got out after 6 years. He was married, had a couple of kids, and he enjoyed his tour. He was always in the Atlantic Fleet. I was always in the Pacific Fleet. But one of my last ships, I served on the same ship that he had just left, USS America. So to all the military people, I've always told, talk it up. Talk good about the military. Thank them for the education they're going to give you. Don't sit in the background badmouthing everything. Don't join the groups that are harmful to morale. And that's always been my job, is to try to make the young guys understand there are dirty jobs and tough jobs in the Navy, and you have to work your way up, and the best way to do it is put your time in, do the best you can in your job, and you'll enjoy it a lot more than you would if you want to grumble. Taking things a little out of context, I'm backing up into when I was a first-class aviation electrician, and I got a letter from my command that Admiral Burke, who was the CNO of the Navy, wanted to hold a symposium of various young sailors all around the globe, and he directed Admiral Fetterman, I believe, to hold a symposium in San Diego. So there was about, I would say, from the Pacific Fleet, there was about 600 of us that were called in, and they broke us up into committees. And the committee that I wound up on, 2 of them, was career and pay. And one of the things that the ad hoc committee wanted to know was, why were we losing all the young sailors that we just sent through all the schools and got out into the fleet? And no sooner did they serve their time in enlistment, and they would immediately get out, because this is the late 50s and industry is roaring, and they're not happy in the Navy at the time because the technology has, because of transition in the jets and stuff, has got beyond a lot of the sailors that were World War II veterans and everything. And the Navy reduced the number of ships that they had, so they didn't need thousands of gunners mates and thousands of torpedo men and various engineering rates and stuff for the ships, because they got down to, I believe, 200 ships. So what they wanted was highly skilled, sensitive kids coming right out of high school into the Navy schools, technical schools, and stay there. So Admiral Burke, CNO, decided that something had to be done about it, and the Chief of Naval Personnel was directed to hold these seminars to find out what the young group felt like and why they were leaving. Well, as being one of the young group, but that time frame I had already been first class for almost 2 years, and I was studying for chief because I could go up for chief after I had 7 years in. We started to talk in there about the World War II vets were great guys, but a lot of them didn't have a lot of math. A lot of them didn't understand. The two chiefs I worked for, actually one of them had to sign his name on a paycheck because he could barely read and write. But the two of them could not understand the technical stuff that we were now faced with. But they would always be the senior guy in the shop or the senior guy in the squadron. They would be the leading chief or the maintenance chief, and it was their job to train the rest of us. And they developed a name for them. They called them Tojo chiefs, because a lot of these chiefs came in the Navy as chiefs. They never came in as the lower ranks and enlisted. And those that were in the lower ranks were all second and first class now because they'd been in 10 years. So it was a feeling like I know a hell of a lot more than the chief does, but he's the boss. So I can go out to industry and I can take my GI Bill and I can do better out there than trying to work for somebody that that doesn't really understand what I do or that can write my reports and stuff. So we discussed that in depth. What could we do about it? And he said, well, number one, we have to figure out some way to get around the seniority. Well, that led right into the second group, which was pay and allowances. Everybody that's an E5 or an E6 in the Navy makes exactly the same pay. Now you have somebody that's got 10 years in, he can't pass the test to get promoted, but he's going to get the same exact pay as some kid that has been through all the schools and has to be in competition with them, and he is going to get 10 points for 10 years of service, and he's going to take an exam which he will maybe fail, but he'll get points for time in rate for the time that he was second class. So he's got a 12 or 14 point advantage to add to his fail grade, and he will get the promotion. But we haven't solved the problem. He doesn't have the technical ability. Even if we send him to the technical school, he can't get through it. The solution was, let's create 2 additional pay grades. We'll create E8 and E9. Prior pay grades went from E1 to E7. E7 was chief. Now, we basically understood that if we gave exams for E8 and E9, Tojo chiefs would not make it, even with their longevity score. After almost 3 weeks in this symposium and going through all of the rigmarole and talking to the young guys and stuff, the ad hoc committee went back to Congress, talked about it, and the creation of E8 and E9 came into the service.